Okay, so this lesson deals with factoring trinomials, but it involves the method called AC method. And that AC method, and it's important you know this, is sometimes called product sum. So it is very important that you think of those two together, AC method, product sum. All right, and it does involve grouping. So the AC method involves writing a trinomial as 4 terms, because remember when we did grouping, we used 4 terms. We had 4 terms when we did grouping. So it's not a difficult process. There's only one little part that may cause you a little issue, but some students prefer the AC method over trial and error. But it's very important you know both, because some problems, depending on the problem, you may use trial and error. You may be comfortable with trial and error, and other problems you may use AC method. So it's important you know trial and error, and it's important you know the AC method. So let's just quickly review the AC method. So this will be a review. And so if I look at number 1, we have xy plus 8x minus 4y minus 32. And so notice I have a polynomial with 4 terms. And so remember when we had those 4 terms, we grouped the first 2 and we grouped the last 2. And then in the first group, we look for a common factor. So my GCF in that first group is x. So I factor out an x and I got y plus 8. All right, because x times y is xy, x times 8 is 8x. From the second group, remember you factor out that negative sign here, so it'll be a negative factor. And so I factor out a negative 4, and so I get y plus 8. So again, whenever you factor out a negative factor, always be careful, because a negative times a positive is a negative, so don't put a negative here. Now, notice that when you group them, you're supposed to have these two be in the same factor, so that means you could factor out a y plus 8. So I get y plus 8 times, and then when you factor out the y plus 8, you're left with x minus 4. So x minus 4. All right. Number 2, let's suppose we had this. We had 6x squared minus 9x plus 10x minus 15. So 6x squared minus 9x plus 10x minus 15. And so again, I have 4 terms, and so I'm going to group. And so when I group this from the first group, I can factor out a 3x. So I get 3x times 2x is 6x squared, and 3x times a negative 3 is a negative 9x. From the second group, I'm going to factor out a positive 5, and so I get 5 times 2x is 10x, and then 5 times a negative 3 is a negative 15. And notice that these two groups have a common factor, so you factor out that 2x minus 3, and then when you factor out the 2x minus 3, you're left with 3x plus 5. Okay. Now I want to come back to number 2. You see number 2. You see that these two terms are here. Aren't they like terms? So that means I can combine them, right? So I want to show you something. I want to show you what's going to happen. So when I combine these, that negative 9x plus 10x, that's x, and then minus 15. So I want to show you what's going to happen with the AC method. So with the AC method, you will be given this right here. You'll be given a trinomial, and you want to use the AC method, so that means that you're going to write this trinomial using 4 terms. So you're going to go from here to here. And I want you to notice that when you go from 3 terms to 4 terms, what's happening is that middle term here, the x term, you're going to rewrite as the sum of 2 terms. So in other words, you're going to say 6x squared, and you're going to rewrite this as the sum of 2 terms. And so in this case, it was negative 9x plus 10x. So that's what that was. And then your minus 15. All right. So that's a process. So what's going to happen is with the AC method is you will be given this, and you're going to rewrite that middle term using 2 terms, and then you group. And that's what we did here. Okay. So that's AC method. All right. Now, let's look at using the AC method. So use the AC method. Now remember the AC method, you need to also know the words product sum. Okay, so let's look at number 1. So let's suppose number 1 we had 5x squared plus 17x plus 6. 5x squared plus 17x plus 6. Now again, you have trial and error, and now you have the AC method. So you have two tools in your box to help you with factoring. Okay, so here's the idea of the AC method. All right, so first of all, and you have this right here in your Canvas folder. So you got to make sure that your trinomial is in descending order. So another word for descending order in this case is standard form. So make sure it's in standard form. And so in this case it is, because I have 5x squared plus 17x plus 6. It is also important that you know that we define a to be the coefficient of x squared, we define b to be the coefficient of x, and we define c to be your constant. Okay? And so the AC method involves, oh, and by the way, so as always, just make sure you factor out the GCF first, just like we've been doing before. And so starting with step 3 would be the new thing. Actually, it's really just step 3 and 4, because the rest of this just involves grouping. All right, so the AC. So you see how I have AC right here? So that's your product. So A times C, AC method, A times C. So you're looking at product. So your product will be A times C, and your sum will be, in this case, B. So your sum is B. All right, so product sum. So product sum. So when you use the AC method, you're looking at the product of A and C, and the sum is B. Okay? All right, so it does help if you denote A, B, and C first. So A is 5, C is 6, and then B is 17. So A is 5, C is 6, and B is 17. Okay, it helps you do that. And so you want the product now. You want your product. And so remember, you got to multiply A and C together. So you want your product to be 5 times 6, which is 30. And you want your sum to be 17. Okay? And so what you want to do now is you want to rewrite this middle term as two terms. You want to write this middle term as two terms. Now you may say, well, how do I find that middle term? Okay, so here's the thing. And this is going to be step 4. So step 4. So here's the idea, and we're going to go back and look at step 4. So what's going to happen is this. Now what I would do is I would use an X first, and in that X I will put the word product up here and the word sum right here. So notice this X, you have 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you want your product to be 30, and you want your sum to be 17, right? So put 30 here, put 17 here. And then go off to the side now, and let's talk about factors of 30. So you want your product to be 30, correct? And you want your sum to be 17. All right, so you want your product to be 30. So you want to find two numbers, because remember, you want to add these up. So you want to find two numbers whose product is 30 and whose sum is going to be 17. All right, so what I would do is I would start, and in your mind, this is what you have now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this down here. So you're thinking about factors of 30. Factors of 30. All right. So since 30 is even, I would just go ahead and start with 2. So 30 divided by 2 is 15. So I know that 2 and 15, and in fact I already found it. So 2 times 15 is 30, and then when I add them up, what do I get? 17. Okay? So I found it right away, but some of you may have said this, all right? Let's think about 6 and 5. Do y'all agree that 6 times 5 is 30? But what's the issue? When I add them up, what do I get? 11. Y'all agree? All right, now let me say something else. And you got to remember this from what we did with trial and error. See, you want the product to be 30. That's positive. In order for this product to be positive, the signs have to be the same, right? Well, the signs are the same. Either they're both positive or they're both negative. So I'm going to ask you this. can you use -2 and -15? Is -2, -15 correct? No. Because although their product is 30, -2 times -15 is a positive 30, the sum is a -16. But what do you want? A positive 17. Okay, so when and you're going to see this as we go through the process. So the product is positive. If the product is positive, that means that these signs have to be the same. And I would look at the sign that's here. So since the sum is positive, that means that both of these have to be positive numbers. Okay. It just so happened that we found the first one right away. Someone else could have said 10 and 6. Y'all agree? I'm sorry, 10 and 3. Y'all agree that 10 times 3 is 30, but what's the problem? When I add them up, I get 13. All right? So once you find, and you are going to go through this process where you're going to try different things, and then all of a sudden you find the one that works. Once you find the one that works, and this is the one that works, then what I would do at that point, once you find the one that works, put those two numbers here. And it does not matter. It does not matter whether you put the 2 here or whether you put the 15 here. It does not matter. Okay? Now, those are the two numbers I'm going to use. So what that means now is that I'm going to come back here. Now, that's the hard part. The rest is easy. The rest is easy because you all know how to group. This is the hard part. Okay, so I'm going to get 5x squared. You're going to rewrite this using two terms, using those two numbers. So you're going to say plus 2x plus 15x. See where I got that from? And then notice, always make sure, always double check, is 2x and 15x 17x? Yes. And then plus 6. And then once you do that, you're almost done. You group. You group now. So I get, over here I can factor out an x, and so when I factor out the x, I get x times 5x plus 2. Over here I'm going to factor out a positive 5, and so I get 2x, I'm sorry, not a positive 5, excuse me, 3, right? So factor out a 3, and so I get 5x plus 2. And so notice that these two factors are the same, so I get 5x plus 2 times x plus 3. Now again, just like we did in the past, don't go any further until you check this. So let's check. 5x times x is 5x squared. 2 times 3 is 6. And then now let's do the outer. The outer is 15x. The inner is 2x, and I get 17x. And it kind of makes sense. That the outer and the inner better be these two, right? Okay, y'all see that? 15x, and then 2x. Okay? So that's where that comes from. That's where that sum comes from, is that outer and that inner. Now, you remember how I said it didn't matter whether you put 2 or 15 first? Doesn't matter. So someone else could have said this. I just want to show you. Someone else could have said, well, I'm going to rewrite this as 5x squared plus 15x plus 2x plus 6. That's fine. You can put 2x first, or you can put 15x first. You'll still get the same answer in the end. You'll still get this factorization. So I'm going to group the first two. I'm going to group the last two. And so when I group the first two, I get 5x times x plus 3. All right, always double check. And then plus, in this case, I'm going to factor out a 2, and I get x plus 3. And so notice that these two groups have the same factor. So I get x plus 3 times 5x plus 2. And that's what we had here. Okay? All right, so that's number 1. So this is the hard part. The hard part. So you got to also make sure that when you write A, B, and C, that you write them correctly. Okay? All right. Number 2. So let's do number 2. Oh, and by the way, let's go back over these rules. So the first thing we did was we made sure that it was in standard form. Then if, just like before, you always want to do the GCF first. You always want to factor out the GCF first. Then we multiplied A and C together, and then we identified B, and B was your sum. So this is your product, that's your sum. So your product is AC, your sum is B. Once you find your product, once you find your product and sum, then you're going to use this approach. So you want to find two numbers. You want to find two numbers whose product is AC and whose sum is B. So you're going to find two numbers whose product is AC and whose sum is B. Okay, product, sum. Once you find the one that works, that's step 5. So this right here is step 5. Once you find the one that works, then you rewrite the middle term using those two numbers. And then the rest of this is just grouping. So you group. You factor by grouping. Okay? All right, so let's do number 2. Number 2, let's suppose we had this for number 2. All right, number 2. Let's suppose we had 6x squared minus 17x plus 10. So 6x squared minus 17x plus 10. All right, so it's in standard form. It's in descending order. The GCF here is 1. So if the GCF was other than 1, I'd factor it out. So let's denote A, B, and C. So A is a coefficient of x squared, so that's 6. C is your constant, so that's 10, equals 10. And then B is the coefficient of x. Now be careful, make sure you use the correct sign. That's negative 17. All right, so always make sure that all these numbers here are correct. Otherwise, all of this work will be for nothing. All right, so you want to find product. So that's going to be your product right here. And that's going to be your sum. Okay? So you want the product to be 6 times 10, which is 60. That'll agree? Okay. Now, you want to find, so remember, you're trying to rewrite this middle term. You want to use, remember the AC method involves grouping. So you want to write this middle term as 2 terms so you can get 4 terms. So you're going to write this as 2 terms. Okay? And that's where this comes in. So this right here. So you're going to use the X and use the table. So you want to find 2 numbers whose product is 60 and whose sum is negative 17. So 2 numbers whose product is 60, and that's a positive 60, and whose sum is negative 17. So then we're going to go off to the side. We're going to figure out what those 2 are. So you want the product to be 60, and you want the sum to be negative 17. Okay? All right. Now, before we go on, I want to remind you about something. You see this product's positive, right? And you want the sum to be negative. Well, what can you tell me about those 2 numbers here? If the product's positive, that means that those 2 numbers have to be the same, correct? Either they're both positive or they're both negative. What do you think they have to be? Both what? They have to be both negative. Why? Because the sum is negative. So if you go back to number 1, the product was positive, the sum is positive. So both of those had to be positive numbers. Here, in this case, they now have to be negative numbers. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and figure out some pairs. So you want to figure out pairs of numbers that will work. So for example, now you may want to, I'm going to go ahead and do it right here. So factors of 60. So you look at factors of 60, right? Okay, so what I would do is I would just start out with the smallest factors. So besides 1, because you know that 1 times 60 is 60. Then let's do 2. 2 times what? 30, right? And then you see this 30. Will 3 go into 30? Yeah. So I'm going to say 3 times what? 3 times, and then just be careful. Make sure you use your calculator. 60 divided by 3 is 20. Okay. What else can go into 30? Let's say 10. Y'all agree? So 10 times 6, right? 10 times 6. What else do you think? Now, as you go through this, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to put here. All right. But that's the process. So you're thinking of factors of 30, just like this. All right. But you know when you put it here, when you put those 2 factors here, they have to be negative. So here's my question to you. Will negative 1 and negative 60 help you? No. I mean, the product's positive 60, but what's the issue? The sum is negative 61, and that's not what you wanted. You wanted negative 17. So you just keep going through this process. You keep going through the process until you find one that works. All right. So we know, for example, we know that negative 2 and negative 30 won't work Because although their product is a positive 60, the sum is a negative 32. So that didn't work. Okay? So then you go through the process. You keep going through here. So you think about factors of 60. So you can look at this and notice that these won't work. So let's say 5. 5 goes into 10, doesn't it? So that means that 5 will go into 60. So 5 goes into 10, that means 5 goes into 60. So let's say 60 divided by 5 is 12. And so when I come here and I put those two here, that's negative 5, negative 12. Oh, but notice, what do I get for the sum? I get negative 17, and I found it. So I found the two numbers that will work. So my two numbers are negative 5 and negative 12. Those are my two numbers. But that's the process you're going to go through. You're going to go through what two numbers multiplied together will give me 60. Okay, and notice there are quite a few here. There are quite a few, but notice what I did as I went through here. So I said 1 times 60, then I know that 2 goes into 60, so I can say 2 times 30. Then what I did was I said, well, 3 goes into 30, so if 3 goes into 30, that means that 3 goes into 60. So then 3 times 20 is 60, but that didn't help me. And then I said, well, I know that 10 goes into 20 or 10 goes into 30, doesn't matter. But so if 10 goes into 20, then that means that 10 has to go into 60 evenly. And so that's that 10 times 6 and so on. Okay? So when you write things down like this, use these factors to see what else will go into them, because it will go into this as well. Okay? All right, now once you find the two that works, the rest is easy. See, that's the more difficult part right here. When using the AC method, the rest is easy. You're going to rewrite your middle term using those two numbers. Okay? The order in which you put them doesn't matter. We saw that in the beginning. We saw that here. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether you put negative 6 first or whether you put, in this case, 20 first. Okay? That does not matter. I'm just going to go ahead and put it. I'm going to put this one first since I wrote it first. Okay, so I'm going to get 6x squared minus 5x minus 12x and then plus 10. All right, so notice I went from 3 terms to how many terms? 4. And so this negative 17x, always verify, negative 17x is negative 5x and negative 12x is negative 17x. Okay, once I write this, the rest is easy. It's grouping. The rest is just grouping, and you're done once you factor. So in this case, I can factor out an x, and so I get x times 6x minus 5, right? And then minus, so you're going to factor out here a negative, 2? And so negative, now remember when you factor out negative, always be careful. Negative 2 times 6x is negative 12x. Negative 2 times a negative 5 is a positive 10. And notice that these two groups have the same factor. And so you're going to get 6x minus 5 times x minus 2. And there's your answer. Okay? And again, just verify. Just always double check before you move on. 6x times x is 6x squared. So that's what you wanted up here. Your last is negative 5 times negative 2 is a positive 10. And notice that the outer is negative 12x, which you knew you had to have because that's what this is right here, right? And then your inner is negative 5x, which is this right here. So these two, when you do outer and inner, is just this 2 right here. And so it's going to be like that. All right, so there's your answer. Okay, let's look at number 3. Number 3, let's suppose we had this for number 3. Number 3, let's suppose we had 8x squared plus 14x minus 15. So 8x squared plus 14x minus 15. Okay, now it's in standard form, so I'm going to go ahead and the GCF here is 1. So in these problems, the GCF is going to be 1. In the next lesson, you're going to be able to factor out the GCF. So you're going to do that first. Okay, so A is a coefficient of x squared, so that's 8. Then C, remember AC method, product sum. So C is your constant. Now be careful, don't say it's 15. It's negative 15. That's important. And then B is the coefficient of x, which is positive 14. So this is your product. Use your calculator if you need to. So your product's going to be a positive times a negative is a negative. So your product's going to be, let's see, 8 times 15 is 120. So your product's going to be negative 120. And you want your sum to be 14. Okay? Now that's going to be a little bit more challenging because this is negative 120. So there are many factors that go into 120. So you want to find two numbers. You want to find two numbers whose product is negative 120 and whose sum is 14. Okay? And so let's think about this in terms of a table. So you want the product to be negative 120 and you want the sum to be 14. Now, I want you to remember our discussions in the past, in the last two problems that we did. So notice that this product was positive, which means that the signs had to be the same. And they were both negative because my sum was negative. Here, your product is negative. So what does that mean about these signs in here? That means that the signs are different. Okay, the signs are different. So when I put those two numbers, one has to be positive, the other one has to be negative, and you want the sum to be positive. Okay. All right. Now, as we go through the discussion, I'm going to remind you about some things that you learned a long time ago in previous courses. So, for example, I'm just going to write this right here. Do y'all agree? Do y'all agree that 10 times 12 is 120? Right? Now, remember, 10 times 12 is 120, but what do I want? A negative 120. Now, I want you to think strategic because you're going to be doing this all through here. You want the sum to be positive. Well, in order for the sum to be positive, then which of these better be negative and which of these better be positive? Well, that means that the larger of these has to be this sign here. So that means that 10 has to be negative. Okay? Negative 10 times positive 12 is a negative 120. When I add them up, negative 10 plus 12 is 2. All right, so you want the sum to be positive. So if you make a mistake, it's no big deal. You could have, if you wanted to, guys, you could have said negative 10 times 12. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. But I'm just telling you to be a little bit more strategic. Think about what you want your sign to be. And so if these signs have to be different, then the larger of these will be the sign that you're going to have here. Okay? Now notice that 10 plus negative 12 is negative 2. And you know that that's wrong, first of all, because it's negative. You want it to be positive. So then you got to think about your factors of 120. So let's think about factors of 120 to help us. Factors of 120. All right. Now here's some of the things that you could do. You could do like we did in the previous problem. We could list the factors. We could say 2 times 60 is 120, right? And so you know, obviously you know you're not going to list that here, right? Because even if you did, you would say 260, so 2 would have to be negative. And then when you add them up, though, you would get, what, 58, right? So that's not going to help you. But then what I would then do, once I get that 60, I was asking myself, okay, what are factors of 60 then? Well, the factors of 60, let's say 10. We already have 10. Let's say 6, right? 6. So I can say 6 times. Now, if 6 goes into 60, then that means that 6 goes into 120. So 120 divided by 6 gives me 20. Okay? So 120 divided by 6 gives me 20. So 6 times 20 is 120. But remember, I want negative 120. So I'm going to put 6 and 20 here. So if I put 6 and 20, which one of these do you think you can make negative? Remember, you want the sum to be positive, so you can make this one negative. And look, right away, what do you get? You get 14. So you found it. You found what two numbers that work, negative 6 and 20. Negative 6 and 20. All right, so once you find the ones that worked, then you go ahead and you rewrite this middle term using those two numbers. Okay, so I'm going to use negative 6 and 20. Negative 6 and 20. And again, it does not matter when you rewrite this whether you put negative 6 first or 20 first. It does not matter. Okay. So now once you find the two that work, the two numbers that work, you're going to go ahead and rewrite this term. So I get 8x squared minus 6x plus 20x minus 15. Make sure you put the x's there, okay, because you got to make sure you get that 14x. So negative 6x plus 20x is 14x. Okay, that's what this is. Now once you write it as four terms, then you're going to use grouping. So in the first group, I can factor out a 2x, and so 2x times 4x is 8x squared, and then 2x times a negative 3 is a negative 6x. From the second group, I'm going to factor out a positive, what's that, 2? Okay, positive 5, excuse me, positive 5. And so when I do that, I get 4x, because 5 times 4x is 20x, minus 3. And then notice that those two groups have a common factor, so I'm going to factor that out. So I get 4x minus 3 times 2x plus 5. Okay? All right, so that was number 3. So again, the hard part is here, but you got to remember some stuff about number theory. So a negative times a positive is a negative. All right? And so one has to be positive, one has to be negative, and you want the sum to be positive. So which means that before you put your negative, before you put your sign, that the larger of these is going to be the sign here. Okay, so that's why you saw that 20 as positive and 6 we put as negative. All right, number 4. So let's think about number 4. So number 4, let's suppose we had this. We had 6x squared minus 5x minus 21. So 6x squared minus 5x minus 21. It's in descending order. It's in standard form. The GCF is 1. So let's denote A, which is 6, C, which is negative 21, right? And then B, which is negative 5. And so again, always make sure, before you go any further, make sure that you definitely wrote these correct, because all of this work will be incorrect as you go through the process. All right, so this is going to be your product. Remember, your product is AC, so A times C. So your product, so 6 times a positive times a negative is a negative, so your product's going to be negative. So that's your product. And so 6 times 21, 6 times 21 gives me 126. It'll be negative 126. And then you want your sum, this is your sum, to be negative 5. Okay? So again, it's going to be a little bit more work because some of you may come up with it quick, just like we did here. Some of you may take a few more steps. Okay? Now again, notice that depending on the direction says use any method. If the direction says use any method at all, then trial and error is probably easier for that one. If the direction said use the AC method, then you must use the AC method. Okay? But for the most of the time, your problem is going to say just factor. So if it just says factor, you can use any method you want to. But if you're given a choice, you got to use it. So in this case, we are telling you to use the AC method. So we must go using the AC method, although trial and error is probably easier with that one. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to find two numbers whose product is negative 126 and whose sum is negative 5. Okay, so when I do my table, use a table to help me as well. So I'm using this in my table to help me. I want the product to be negative 126, and I want my sum to be negative 5. And so I want to find two numbers whose product is negative 126. So notice the product's negative. That means one's positive, one's negative. And you want the sum to be negative, right? So this time you want the sum to be negative. Here, the sum was positive. So you want the sum to be negative this time. Okay, so as we go through this, think about our discussion. So for example, I'm just going to put this out here. Do y'all agree that 2 goes to 126? Negative 126. So 2 times 63 is 126, right? But I want it to be negative. I want it to be negative. So and again, some of you could say -2, some of you could say -6. It doesn't matter, but I want you to think about what you want to end up with. You want to end up with a negative sum. Well, if I'm going to end up with a negative sum, then that means the larger of these better be negative. All right, so that's the way I would think about that. The larger of these better be negative. And so notice that when I add these, though, that doesn't help me still. It doesn't help me, but because I get a positive 2 and a negative 63 is a negative 61, and what I wanted was a negative 5. Okay, so then we got to think about your factors of 126. So let's go off to the side. I'll go off to the side and think about that. Let's think about the factors of 126. Factors of 126. Okay, factors of 126. So for example, remember one of the things you learned in the previous course was a factor tree. So you found two numbers whose product is 126, and you wanted those numbers to be prime. You wanted to start off with a prime number. So 2 is prime. 2 times 63, right? Then once this is prime, you circled it. Then over here you said, well, 3 goes into 63, so that's 3 times 21, right? 3 is prime, you circled it. Then you said 21, that's going to be 3 times 7, and you found all of your prime factors. Okay, so what you found was that 126 is 2 times 3 times 3 times 7. And so then what I would then do is this. I would just go ahead and just make sure that's correct. Use your calculator if you need to. 6 times 21 is 126. Okay, so then what I would then do is this. I would try different products here. Okay, so for example, you see where I had this 2 times 63? So what I would do is I'd pick 2, and then I'd multiply these out. 6 times 7 is 63. So that didn't help me, though. So then I would say, all right, I'm going to choose 2 times 3 is 6. 6. And then 7 times 3 is 21. Okay, see what I did? And then, so you're using your prime factorization. This is called the prime factorization. Okay, prime factorization means that every composite number can be written as a product of prime numbers. That's what that means, and that's true. And so you're just going to pick two. You're going to pick 2 pairs of products here that will give you 126, and you put that here. And so remember, though, that it has to be negative. So one of these has to be negative. I know the sum is negative, so I'm going to make this one negative. But that's not going to help me, right? Because when I add those up, 6 and a negative 21, use your calculator if you need to. 6 plus negative 21 gives me negative 15. But what did you want? You wanted negative 5. So using 6 and 21 didn't help, right? So let's try something else. Let's say 3 times 3 is 9. So let's say 9, and then 2 times 7 is what? 14? You see what I'm doing? So I'm just picking 2 factors here, and I'm multiplying together. So I said 3 times 3 is 9. Okay? So that means that 2 times 7 is 14. So 9 times 14 is 126. But one of those has to be negative. So which one has to be negative? The 14. Because my sum is negative. And look right away, what do I found? I found the one that worked. So here's the 2 numbers that work, because what's 9 and negative 14? Negative 5. So sometimes it helps if the number is pretty big to use your factor tree to write this prime factorization, and then you just go and you kind of pick pairs of numbers that will give you this product of 126. But in this case it's negative, so you have to make one of those negative. Okay? Now, once you find the one that works, I found the one that works now. Once you find that one that works, you put those 2 numbers here. All right, so always verify. 9 times negative 14 is negative 126. 9 plus negative 14 is a negative 5. All right? Okay, now once you find the one that works, then you're going to rewrite the middle term using those 2 numbers. So I get 6x squared plus 9x minus 14x, and always make sure that's negative 5x, and it is, and then minus 21. And now you just group, factor by grouping. So in the first group, I could factor out a 3x, and I get 2x, because 3x times 2x is 6x squared, plus 3, because 3x times 3 is 9x. Second group, I'm factorizing negative GCF. In this case, it will be negative 7. And I get 2x. Now remember, when you factorize negative, always be careful. So it's negative 7 times 2x is negative 14x. A negative 7 times a positive 3 is a negative 21. Notice those two groups have the same factor, so you're going to factor it out. So 2x plus 3 times 3x minus 7. And so there's your answer. Okay? All right, let's look at another one. Let's look at number 5. So number 5, let's suppose in number 5 we had this. Number 5. All right, number 5, we have 19x minus 21 plus 12x squared. So 19x minus 21 plus 12x squared. Okay? So what do you notice about number 5? What do you notice? Well, first of all, it's not in standard form. So let's go ahead and write in standard form and put in descending order. Okay? So I'm going to get 12x squared plus 19x minus 21. All right, now, remember you want to rewrite the middle term using two terms so you can get 4 terms altogether. So that's where the product sum comes in. So A is 12, C is negative 21, and then B is 19. So you want your product to be positive times the negatives are negative. So you want your product to be, and then 12 times 21 is 252. Good Lord. And then you want your sum to be 19. Okay? You want your sum to be 19. All right, now, so you want to find two numbers. You want to find two numbers whose product is negative 252, and whose sum is 19. All right, so we could do the table as well. Product, negative 252, sum, 19. Now, what I would do, just like we did this one. You remember this one? Let's do that. Let's go ahead and use that factor tree to help us. So this is positive. I know the product's negative, but when we do the factor tree, let's do the positive 252. So the factors of 252. So we're doing the prime factorization. So let's see. 2 times that, so that's even when you use 2. Remember, you want to use prime numbers. You want to rewrite this as a product of prime numbers. So 2 times 1, use your calculator if you need to. 252 divided by 2 is 126. All right, so then this is prime, so then I go to the next one. So this composite number, it will be 2 times, what's that, 63? Okay, so that's prime. 63 is 3 times 21. That's prime. And 21 is 3 times 7. And now they're both prime. So that means that 252, the prime factorization of 252 will be 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 7. Okay? All right. And then all you do is this. All you do is just pick pairs of numbers and then multiply those out and then figure out what the next one would be, which means this. Okay, listen carefully. So I'm going to use those two pairs here. 2 times 2. What's 2 times 2? Well, that's 4, right? So I'm going to say 4, and then use your calculator. 252 divided by 4 gives me 63. I want the product to be negative, so that means one of these has to be negative. But you want the sum to be positive. So which one do you think is going to be negative? This one. But does that help you? Nope. Because what's a negative 4 plus 63? It's a positive, 59? So that didn't help, right? So then let's go back to this now. Let's go back to this. And then instead of saying 2 times 2, maybe let's do something bigger, possibly. Let's say 7 times 3 is 21, right? So I'm going to put 21 here. Now use your calculator. 252 divided by 21 is 12. Okay? Now it kind of made sense that would be 12 because look, I said 7 times 3. Y'all agree? So 7 times 3. So there's your 21 right here. And then what's 2 times 2? 4. 4 times 3 is 12. So 21 times 12 gives me 252. But I need this to be negative. So one of these has to be negative. Which one do you think you're going to want negative, knowing that your sum is positive? Well, it'll be this one. Now when I add them up, let's see what we get. 21 plus a negative 12 gives me 9. Did I help me? Nope, that did not help. Okay, but then you go through the process. You see the process you go through? You go through the process. But you gotta keep doing this until you find the one that works. Until you find the one that gives you a product that's negative 252 and a sum that's 19. Okay, you gotta find the ones that work. All right, so then we go through the process some more. So let's say 3 times 3 then. 3 times 3 is 9, right? So let's see what 252 divided by 9 is. So 252 divided by 9 is 28. Y'all agree? All right. So 9 times 28 is 252, but I want it to be negative, so that means one of these has to be negative. Knowing that your sum's positive, which one of these is going to be the negative? It'll be this one. And then look, guys, look, when you add those up, what do you get? Negative 9 plus 28 gives me 19. I found it. I found the 2 that works. So it does help, especially when these numbers are pretty large. It does help to do the prime factorization. Okay, so I found the ones that work. So now we're going to rewrite this middle term using those 2 numbers. So I'm going to get 12x squared. I'm going to rewrite this now using negative 9x plus 28x and then minus 21. Okay, so now since I have 4 terms, I can use grouping. So move the first 2 and the last 2. In the first group, what can I factor out? I can factor out a what? 3x. And so I'm going to get 3x times 4x is 12x squared, and then 3x times a negative 3 is negative 9x. From the second group, I can factor out a 7, and so I get 4x minus 3. So notice that these 2 groups have the same factor, common factor, so I get 4x minus 3 times 3x plus 7. Okay, so that should be your answer. And again, as always, check. 4x times 3x is 12x squared. Your last, a negative 3 times a positive 7 is a negative 21. And then and you remember your outer and your inner, you already knew what it's going to be. So your outer is 28x, right? That's this right here. Your inner is negative 9x. That's this right here. When you add them up, you get 19x. Okay, so there's your answer. All right, so that's number 5. Let's look at number 6. Number 6. So number 6, we have, and again, sometimes it will be necessary to do the prime factorization. So always keep that in mind. Okay, number 6, we have 6x squared minus 17xy plus 12y squared. All right, now I have 2 variables here, and that's okay. I can deal with that. I'm still going to use the AC method with this. Okay, so you have the x and y's here. All right, so A is 6, C is 12, and B is negative 17. Okay, so A is 6, B is 12, and C is negative 17. All right, so just make sure it's in standard. Now, when we talk about standard form, we normally talk about in terms of one variable. So if I put this in descending order based on x, I get 6x squared minus 17x. And you see there's no x here, so I'm going to put that last. All right, so when you have 2 variables, just look at one of them to rewrite it. So x squared, x, and then there's no x here. So this will be your A, this will be your C, this will be your B. Okay? All right, so I want the product to be 6 times 12. So 6 times 12, which is 72. And I want the sum to be negative 17. So I'm going to rewrite this middle term right here. I want to rewrite this middle term so that the product is 72. So I want to find 2 numbers. whose product is 72 and whose sum is a negative 17. Okay, so now I'm going to use the table to help me as well. So I want the product to be 72, and I want the sum to be negative 17. So I need to find two numbers whose product is a positive 72 and whose sum is negative 17. Now before I go on, what should those two numbers whose product is 72, are they going to have the same sign or different signs? They have the same sign. And what should that sign be? Should the sign be both positive or both negative? What do you think? Both negative, because why? The sum is negative. All right. So let's do a factor tree again. Let's do a factor tree. So let's look at the prime factorization of 72. So 72, remember you're looking at prime numbers. So 2 is a prime number, so use it. That goes into 72. So 2 times, and then 72 divided by 2 gives me 36. 36 is not prime, so I got to factor that further. So give me a prime number that goes into 36. 2. 2 times, and then 36 divided by 2 is 18, right? And then give me a prime number that goes in 18. 2 again. 2 times 9. 2 is prime, so I'm going to circle it. Give me a prime number that goes into 9. 3. 3 times 3. Now, they're both prime, so I'm done. So the prime factorization for 72 would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. And so that's what I'm going to use to help me complete this part right here. Okay? So pick two numbers and multiply them together. So let's say 2 times 3 here. So 2 times 3 is 6, right? Okay? So I'm going to put 6 here. So what's 72 divided by 6? 6 times what's 72? Well, 6 times, let's see, 72 divided by 6 is 12. Y'all agree? And so remember, they have to be both negative. But when I add them up, what do I get? I get what? Negative 18? Okay, negative 18. So that didn't help. So then I'll try something else. And so remember, I did 2 and 3 first. So let's do this. Let's do 3 times 3. Let's do those two. 3 times 3. So let's say 3 times 3 is what? 9. So 9. And then 72 divided by 9. 72 divided by 9 gives me 8. They have to be both negative. And so when I add them up, oh, look what happens. When I add them up, what do I get? I get negative 17. I found it. I found what works. So negative 17. So those are the two that are going to work. Okay? And so now I'm going to rewrite this middle term using those two numbers. Now be careful when you rewrite the middle term. You see how you have an x and y? You got to make sure you still have that in there. So in other words, what I'm saying is I'm going to get 6x squared minus 9xy, right? Minus 8xy. Because a negative 9xy and a negative 8xy is a negative 17xy. And then plus 12y squared. All right. And then you group them, and then you go from there. So you're going to factor by grouping now. So this was the hard part. Once you find the two that works, the rest is easy. So over here, I can factor out from the first group, I could factor out a 3x, and I'm left with 2x minus, what's that, 3y? Okay. From the second group, I'm going to factor out a negative 4y. And now be careful when you factor out a negative, be careful. So negative 4y times 2x, y'all agree is negative xy. A negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 3, and what's that, y? Because negative 4y times a negative 3y is a positive 12y squared. If you're doing this correctly, those two should be the same. So now I'm going to factor this out. So you get 2x minus 3y times, and when I factor the 2x minus 3y, I get 3x minus 4y. And there's your answer. Okay, so again, before you go on to the next problem, always verify, check it. 2x times 3x is 6x squared. A negative 3y times a negative 4y is a positive 12y squared. And then the outer, if you look at it, the outer should be the same as these. The outer and the inner should be the same as these. So the outer Yeah, 2x times negative 4y is a negative 8xy, which is what this was. And then the inner, a negative 3y times a positive 3x is a negative 9xy, which is what this was. Okay? And so that is the AC method. That's the AC method. Now again, it's important you have two tools to deal with: trial and error and the AC method. So knowing both can get you through some of the more difficult factoring problems. So that was, if I go back and find the original sheet, so that was the AC method. So that takes care of this lesson.